The coffee cup shattered against my temple before I even realized what was happening. Hot liquid cascaded down my face as ceramic fragments peppered the floor of Miller's Café. And for a split second I was back in the South China Sea, tasting blood and salt water, while enemy fire rained down around our destroyer. My hands, these damn trembling hands that hadn't been steady since the Tet Offensive, instinctively moved to my sidearm before remembering I was 77 years old and sitting in a diner in Provo, Utah, not crouched behind twisted metal, in the Mekong Delta. "That's what happens when you don't mind your own business, old man," sneered the kid in the designer jacket, his manicured fingers still gripping the handle of what used to be my morning coffee. Behind him, 23-year-old Katie Morrison stood frozen with her order pad, tears streaming down her face where his verbal assault had left invisible bruises just moments before. I wiped coffee from my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. Designer everything, from his $200 sneakers to the gold watch that probably cost more than my monthly disability check. The kind of kid who'd never worked a day in his life, never felt the weight of real responsibility, never watched good men die for something bigger than themselves. "Son," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest, "you need to apologize to the lady." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Lady? That's just some waitress, and this is none of your damn business." He stepped closer, invading my space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Why don't you shuffle back to your corner and finish dying quietly?" The entire cafe went silent. Even the hiss of the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. 37 pairs of eyes watched as this punk dismissed a decorated Navy veteran like yesterday's garbage, and I waited for someone, anyone, to say something. Nobody moved. Katie's tears fell harder now, but she kept her chin up. Good girl. She reminded me of my granddaughter Sarah, who joined the Peace Corps last year despite my warnings about how cruel the world could be to idealistic young women. "Listen here, you little—" I started to rise from my booth, but my arthritis had other plans. My knees buckled slightly, and the kid's grin widened like a shark sensing blood. "What's wrong, Grandpa? Forgot to take your pills today?" He turned to address the room like a performer commanding an audience. "Look at this pathetic old fool. Probably still thinks he's fighting in World War II. That's when something inside me snapped. Not the explosive rage of my younger days, but something colder, more focused. I'd spent 43 years coming to Miller's Café every morning at exactly 0800 hours, drinking black coffee and reading the Salt Lake Tribune while watching the world change around me. I'd watched this town grow from a sleepy college community into a bustling tech hub, watched young families replace old ones, watched progress march forward while veterans like me became relics gathering dust in forgotten corners. But I'd also watched this place become something special. Miller's Café wasn't just a restaurant. It was a gathering place where retired professors shared tables with construction workers, where teenage mothers found encouragement from empty nesters, where humanity showed its better angels on a daily basis. This kid was poisoning all of that with his entitled cruelty. "You're right," I said, slowly getting to my feet despite my protesting joints. "I am old, and I have seen things you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares." I stepped closer, and something in my voice made his smirk falter. "But what I've learned in 77 years is that respect isn't earned by the size of your wallet or the volume of your voice. It's earned by how you treat people who can't fight back. Is that supposed to scare me?" But his voice cracked, slightly, betraying uncertainty beneath the bravado. "I'm not trying to scare you, son. I'm trying to educate you. See, in my experience, there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who build others up, and those who tear them down. You've chosen to be a destroyer." I gestured toward Katie, who was still standing there with remarkable composure. "This young woman works 2 jobs to pay for nursing school. She sends money home to her sick mother in Idaho. She volunteers at the homeless shelter on weekends. What exactly have you contributed to the world besides noise and cruelty?" The kid's face flushed red, You don't know anything about me, you senile old bastard. I know enough. I kept my voice calm, professional. Command voice, my old drill instructor used to call it. I know you've never had to work for anything meaningful. I know you've never had to make a sacrifice for someone else. And I know that right now, you're angry because deep down, you recognize the truth in what I'm saying. He shoved me then. Not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to send me stumbling backward. My hip screamed in protest, and I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. Shut up, old man, he snarled. Just shut your mouth and mind your own business before I really hurt you. The threat hung in the air like cordite smoke. I could feel the collective intake of breath from everyone in the café, the palpable tension of a moment balanced on a knife's edge. Part of me, the younger, angrier part that still remembered hand-to-hand combat training, wanted to show this kid exactly what an old sailor could still do when pushed too far. But then I looked around the room and saw something that stopped me cold. In the corner booth, a teenage boy in a junior ROTC uniform was slowly standing up. His hands were shaking, but his jaw was set with determination. Behind him, a middle-aged woman with a baby stroller rose to her feet, her expression fierce with maternal protectiveness. Near the counter, a taxi driver in a rumpled uniform put down his newspaper and stood, his weathered face grim with purpose. One by one, like dominoes falling in reverse, every single person in Miller's Cafe stood up. The college student with her laptop, the elderly couple sharing a piece of pie, the businessman checking his phone, the off-duty nurse still wearing her scrubs. Even Mrs. Henderson, who was 92 and usually needed help getting out of her chair. They stood in silence, a room full of strangers united by a simple principle. You don't get to abuse people without consequences. The kid's bravado evaporated, like morning mist. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the wall of quiet determination facing him. For the first time since he'd walked in, he looked genuinely uncertain. "You people are crazy," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. That's when Bill Miller himself emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Bill was 65, built like a linebacker despite his age, and had been running this place since before the kid was born. He surveyed the scene with the calm authority of a man who'd seen everything. "Son," Bill said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality, "you need to leave. Now. You can't kick me out. I'm a paying customer." "No," Bill replied. "You're a bully who just assaulted a 77-year-old Navy veteran and threatened my employee. Get out before I call the police." The kid looked around one more time, perhaps hoping for an ally, but found only unwavering disapproval. "This is bullshit," he spat. "My father is going to hear about this. You people have no idea who you're messing with." "And you have no idea who you just messed with," said the ROTC cadet, his young voice steady with conviction. The kid stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bell above it fell to the floor with a discordant clang. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, people began to sit back down, conversations resumed, and the normal rhythm of the morning returned. But something had changed. There was an electricity in the air, a sense of shared purpose that hadn't been there before. People who'd been strangers 5 minutes ago were now nodding to each other, sharing meaningful glances, united by their collective stand against cruelty. Katie approached my table with a fresh cup of coffee and a bag of ice for my temple. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," I replied, accepting the coffee with grateful hands. "That's what decent people do for each other." She smiled through her tears. "The coffee's on the house. Today. And every day this week." I was about to protest when my phone buzzed with a text message, then another. Then my phone started ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I looked at the screen in confusion. "Mr. Johnson," Katie said, her expression shifting to concern. "I think you should see this." She showed me her phone, and my heart sank. The entire confrontation had been captured on the cafe's security camera, and someone had already posted it to social media. The video was spreading like wildfire, thousands of views in just the few minutes since it had been uploaded. But that wasn't the worst part. The comments were already identifying the kid in the designer jacket. Brandon Hutchins, son of Deputy Mayor Robert Hutchins, a powerful figure in Utah state politics. By the time I got home that afternoon, the story had exploded across the internet. Café standoff was trending nationally, and the video had been viewed over 1 million times. News outlets were calling it a powerful moment of civic courage and a symbol of standing up to entitled privilege. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick to my stomach. The next morning, I arrived at Miller's Café to find 3 official-looking vehicles parked outside: Health Department, Fire Marshal, and Building Inspector. Through the window, I could see men in suits photographing everything, measuring dimensions, taking notes on clipboards. Bill met me at the door, his face grim. "They showed up an hour ago," he said. "Suddenly I'm in violation of a dozen regulations I've never heard of. Apparently my grease trap doesn't meet current specifications, and my fire exits are improperly marked, and my refrigeration units are 3 degrees too warm." "That's harassment," I said. "Of course it is. But proving it is another matter entirely." He rubbed his temples like he had a migraine building. "Rhett, I've been running this place for 40 years, never had a single violation. Now suddenly I'm facing $10,000 in fines and possible closure." The message was clear. Cross the deputy mayor's family, face the consequences. But the retaliation didn't stop there. That afternoon I received a visit from Detective Martinez of the Provo Police Department. He was professional but apologetic as he explained that someone had filed a complaint alleging I'd been aggressively confrontational and had incited a mob incident. "It's ridiculous, Mr. Johnson," Martinez assured me, "but I have to investigate every complaint. The complainant is demanding I file charges for disturbing the peace and assault." "Assault?" He threw a coffee cup at my head. "I know, but he's claiming you threatened him first, and that the whole thing was a setup designed to humiliate him." Martinez shook his head in disgust. "Look, I've seen the video. I know what really happened. But pressure is coming from above to take this seriously." The web of retaliation expanded over the following days. The ROTC cadet who'd stood up was suddenly facing disciplinary action at his school for conduct unbecoming. The taxi driver discovered his license was under review for customer complaints that had materialized out of nowhere. Even some of the other cafe patrons reported strange problems: sudden tax audits, workplace investigations, permit delays. The message was becoming clearer. This is what happens when ordinary people challenge the powerful. The story continued to grow online, but now it was taking on darker undertones. Investigative journalists began digging into the Hutchins family connections, revealing a web of political influence, municipal contracts, and regulatory capture that stretched throughout Utah's government. Deputy Mayor Robert Hutchins, it turned out, had been using his position to benefit his business associates for years, and his son Brandon was following the family tradition of believing rules applied to everyone else. But the more attention the story received, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved. Bill's Café was hit with another round of inspections, this time resulting in a temporary closure order. Katie lost her job when the restaurant was forced to shut down, and she couldn't afford to miss work while paying for nursing school. I felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on me. In trying to stand up for basic human decency, I'd inadvertently triggered a war between ordinary citizens and entrenched power, a war that the ordinary citizens were losing badly. That's when the death threats started. They came through social media, anonymous phone calls, and letters slipped under my door. Most were crude and poorly written, the work of internet trolls, but some were different, professionally worded, specific in their knowledge of my daily routines, clinical in their descriptions of what would happen if I didn't keep my mouth shut and disappear. I'd faced enemy fire in Vietnam, survived mortar attacks and ambushes, But there was something uniquely terrifying about being hunted in your own hometown by invisible enemies. I started varying my routes, checking my car for explosives, sleeping, with my old service pistol under my pillow. The stress was taking its toll on everyone involved. Bill aged 10 years and 2 weeks, his proud shoulders sagging under the weight of legal fees and regulatory harassment. Katie moved back in with her parents in Idaho after her apartment lease was mysteriously terminated early by her landlord. The ROTC cadet was expelled from the program entirely, his dreams of a military career shattered by political retaliation. I considered giving up, publicly apologizing, maybe even leaving town entirely. But every time I thought about backing down, I remembered the look on Katie's face when that entitled brat had humiliated her. I remembered the moment when an entire room of strangers had stood up for what was right. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed hopeless. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the incident, I received a phone call from someone identifying herself only as a friend. She had information, she said, but we needed to meet in person. The woman who met me in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store was younger than I'd expected. Maybe early 30s, professionally dressed, with the sharp eyes of someone accustomed to dealing with complex problems. She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, and she had a story to tell. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I've been following your case closely. What's happening to you and your friends isn't random harassment. It's a systematic campaign being orchestrated by the Hutchins family and their allies. But they've made a mistake." She handed me a thick manila folder. "Deputy Mayor Hutchins has been using city resources to conduct personal vendettas for years. The inspectors harassing Mr. Miller, they were pulled off legitimate cases to focus on his café. The detective investigating you? He's been pressured to prioritize your case over actual crimes. The regulatory reviews affecting your other supporters? All initiated by direct orders from the Deputy Mayor's office. How do you know all this? Because I work for the City Attorney's office, and I've been documenting these abuses for months. What happened at the café gave me the opening I needed to expose the whole operation." She explained that Hutchins had been using his position to reward friends and punish enemies for years, but he'd always been careful to maintain plausible deniability. The café incident had made him angry enough to drop his usual caution, and now there was a paper trail connecting him directly to the retaliation campaign. "The problem is," Sarah continued, "I can't expose this alone. I'm just a mid-level city attorney. If I go public with this information, I'll be destroyed professionally and nothing will change. But if you're willing to go public with it, what exactly are you asking me to do? Hold a press conference. Present this evidence to the media. Force the system to respond to irrefutable proof of corruption." I looked through the folder, official memos, email chains, recorded phone conversations, financial records. It was damning, comprehensive, and absolutely guaranteed to make me the target of even more vicious retaliation. "If I do this," I said, "they'll come after me with everything they have." "They're already doing that," Sarah replied. "This is your chance to fight back." She was right, of course. I was already living under siege, already watching good people suffer because they'd stood up for basic human decency. The only question was whether to go down fighting or go down quietly. I held the press conference the next morning on the steps of City Hall. The evidence was devastating. Recording after recording of Deputy Mayor Hutchins ordering subordinates to make life difficult for his son's critics. Email chains discussing how to teach these people a lesson without leaving fingerprints. Financial records showing how regulatory agencies had been weaponized against political enemies. The story exploded across national media within hours. Cable news networks ran wall-to-wall coverage of the Utah corruption scandal. Social media filled with outrage and demands for justice. Political figures from both parties rushed to condemn the abuse of power and call for investigations. Deputy Mayor Robert Hutchins resigned in disgrace that afternoon. His son Brandon issued a public apology and entered a treatment program for anger management and substance abuse issues. The city launched an internal investigation that resulted in a dozen disciplinary actions and policy reforms. Miller's Café reopened 2 days later to a line of customers stretching around the block. Katie got her job back, plus a raise and a scholarship fund that had been established by supporters. The ROTC cadet was reinstated and received personal apologies from school officials. Justice, it seemed, had prevailed. But I barely had time to savor the victory before the next shoe dropped. I was at home, finally allowing myself to relax for the first time in weeks, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman in a business suit holding a briefcase and looking nervously around. "Mr. Johnson? My name is Catherine Morrison. I'm an attorney, and I need to speak with you about something important." I opened the door and she stepped inside with the quick, furtive movements of someone who didn't want to be seen. There was something familiar about her face, but I couldn't place it. "Mr. Johnson, I want to thank you for what you did, for standing up to that bully, and for exposing the corruption that followed. You've changed a lot of lives." "I appreciate that, but—" "You don't understand," she interrupted. "You changed my life specifically, in ways you can't imagine." She opened her briefcase and pulled out an old photograph, a group shot of young Navy sailors standing on the deck of a destroyer. I recognized it immediately. It was from my service in Vietnam, sometime around 1968. "That's my father," she said, pointing to a young man standing next to me in the photo. "Petty Officer James Morrison. He was killed 3 weeks after this picture was taken." The memory hit me like a physical blow. Jimmy Morrison, barely 19 years old, full of jokes and dreams of going home to marry his high school sweetheart. He died when our ship hit a mine in the Mekong Delta, along with 11 other good men who'd never had the chance to grow old and drink coffee in small-town diners. "I don't understand," I said. "What does this have to do with my father?" "Never got to meet me," Catherine continued. "I was born 6 months after he died. My mother raised me alone, always telling me stories about the brave sailor who was my father. But she died when I was 12, and I went into foster care with nothing but this photograph and a few letters." She pulled out another document, a handwritten letter, the paper yellow with age. "This is the last letter my father wrote home. He talks about his shipmates, about the war, about hoping to make it home to see his daughter born. But mostly, he talks about his friend Rhett Johnson, who looked out for the younger sailors and always stood up for what was right." My hands were shaking as I read the letter. Jimmy's words brought back a flood of memories, of a kid who'd been scared but never showed it, who'd talked endlessly about the girl he was going to marry and the children he hoped to have. "Mr. Morrison," I said softly, "your father was a good man, one of the best I ever served with. I know, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to honor his memory. I became a lawyer because I wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves, just like he did." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "But I never imagined I'd get the chance to fight for the man who meant so much to him." The truth hit me like a lightning bolt. Katie Morrison, I'm the waitress from Miller's Café. I'm the woman you stood up for." She smiled through her tears. "I'm James Morrison's daughter, and I've been looking for you my entire life, I say." Room spun around me as the implications sank in. The young woman I'd protected from a bully, the one whose quiet dignity had inspired an entire room to stand up for justice, was the daughter of my old shipmate, a man who died 56 years ago defending the same principles we'd fought for in a small-town café. "But how did you know?" I asked. "How did you know who I was?" I didn't, not at first. I knew there was a Navy veteran who came to the café every day, but I never connected him to the stories my father wrote about Rhett Johnson. It wasn't until the video went viral and reporters started digging into your background that I saw your full military record. She pulled out a newspaper clipping from the press conference, the one showing me holding up the evidence of corruption. Next to it was the old photograph from Vietnam. "Same eyes," she said simply. "Same stubborn jaw. Same man who stands up for what's right, no matter the cost." Katie, Catherine, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. You've already said everything that matters. She stood up, gathering her papers. You stood up for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. You faced down corruption and intimidation because justice mattered more than safety. You honored my father's memory in the most perfect way possible, by being exactly the kind of man he wrote about in his letters. She headed toward the door, then turned back one more time. Mr. Johnson, my father never got to see me grow up. He never got to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, or meet his grandchildren. But he gave me something more valuable than any of that. He gave me the example of men like you, who prove that courage and decency still exist in this world. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the photograph of young sailors who'd been dead for decades. Jimmy Morrison, barely 19, grinning at the camera with the innocent confidence of youth. How could he have known that his shipmate would one day protect his daughter in a small café in Utah? The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. A young father goes to war and dies defending freedom. 56 years later, his old shipmate protects that father's daughter from a different kind of enemy. The circle of service and sacrifice, connecting generations across time. But that wasn't the end of the story. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone buzzing with messages. Overnight, someone had leaked the story of my connection to Katie Morrison to the national media. The tale of the Navy veteran protecting his fallen shipmate's daughter had captured the country's imagination in a way that transcended politics or ideology. Within hours, an honor and remembrance was trending nationwide. Donations poured in for Katie's nursing school fund, for Bill's café repairs, for veteran support organizations across the country. The story had become something bigger than any of us, a reminder that the best parts of America still existed, even in dark times, but the real impact was more personal. Veterans started reaching out, sharing their own stories of loss and connection. Families of fallen soldiers contacted me, grateful for the reminder that their loved ones' sacrifices still mattered. Young people wrote to say the story had inspired them to serve others. Most importantly, Katie and I started meeting regularly, not just as the veteran and the waitress from the viral video, but as family. She told me stories about her father that I'd never heard, shared memories her mother had preserved. I told her about Jimmy's last days, about the brave young man who'd faced death with dignity and honor. 6 months later, Katie graduated from nursing school with honors. I was there in the front row, wearing the dress uniform I hadn't put on in decades, representing the father who couldn't be there himself. In her graduation speech, she talked about service, how her father had served his country, how every day citizens could serve their communities, how sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons but with courage and compassion. My father died when I was too young to remember him, she said. But he left me a gift more valuable than any inheritance. He left me the example of good men who stand up for what's right, even when the cost is high. He left me mentors like Mr. Rhett Johnson, who've shown me that heroism isn't about grand gestures or perfect victories. It's about doing the right thing when no one is watching, and standing up for justice when everyone else is sitting down. As I listened to her words, I finally understood what had really happened in Miller's Café that morning. It wasn't just about confronting a bully or exposing corruption. It was about honor crossing generations, about the responsibility we have to protect not just the people we can see, but the memory of those who came before and the promise of those who come after. Jimmy Morrison had died in the Mekong Delta believing that his sacrifice meant something. 56 years later, in a small café in Utah, it did. The kid in the designer jacket had been right about one thing. I was just an old man with shaking hands. But what he'd failed to understand was that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is an old man who remembers what honor means. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get the chance to keep a promise you made to a friend who died too, young in ways you never could have imagined. That night, I sat in my apartment holding Jimmy's photograph and his daughter's nursing degree, thinking about the strange mathematics of fate. A father's love, preserved in letters and carried forward by strangers. A daughter's courage, inherited from a man she never knew but somehow embodied perfectly. A friendship forged in war, honored decades later in the most ordinary and extraordinary of circumstances. The last line of Jimmy's final letter came back to me then, words I'd memorized but never fully understood until now. Tell Katie I'll always be watching over her, and that I hope she finds good people to watch over her too. Mission accomplished, Jimmy. Your little girl turned out just fine, and she's got people watching over her who learned how to do it from you.